Welcome and good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday, as it is. One more day until football. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the second Bentley CADD ORD training. Close that down. My name is Brian Martin, and we are happy and to introduce Todd Holt once again from Bentley. He's going to be going over the RRR templates with overbuild constraints, reporting, milling, and paving right here. He's got his whole setup right there for overlay striping and widening, striping or stripping. I'm hooked on phonics. You got to help me there, dude.
I think it's overlay and stripping because
Stripping.
it's stripping components or
Double
milling.
P. I
So
gotcha.
basically, it's overlay and milling components, but we call them overlay and stripping. So the words work simultaneously because we need our pavement design that we're going to do. We're going to mill down and then build back up, overbuild or overlay to meet our new requirements.
Okay, so but for everybody online, as we tried to explain this before, Todd's going to have a portion that's going to be presentation wise, but it's meant to be more interactive. So if you have any questions, if you have any problems, district specific or project specific, please do not hesitate to raise your hand, to holler out, and we'll address it from there. But Todd, my friend, I'm going to turn off my camera. Nobody wants to see me, and we just go for it. The floor is yours.
Well, I guess, and this is a new format, so I'm going to bring the teams over a little bit here. So this is what I see in teams. So here's all the attendees. On the top right-hand corner, there is a share button. And if you guys do get stuck or we need to walk through, if you have questions as I walk through some of the exercises or some of the training examples that I have, let me know. And you can share your screen. We can walk through that to help you get unstuck. But like Brian said, let's keep this interactive. So, and I might not have all the answers at this time, but we do have a follow-up. So you can also kind of think of it as, stump the Bentley colleague too. But I was with FDOT before, and I am learning these components. I'll teach you what I know. Maybe a little trick or something you can share with me and the rest of the group, so we can keep it interactive and kind of keep it fun with the examples. But on the top right hand time of the teams, there's two buttons. You can leave, the red button, and there's also a yellow button right next to the share button. Be careful not to hit that yellow button when we're sharing or when we're putting screens on there. And as attendees, you might not get it now, but if you do get into trouble or a question where we want you to share your screen, and we encourage you to do that, you'll see that yellow button. So that's gonna, if you hit that by accident, and accidents do happen, I might do it myself, it's going to end the event for everybody on the call. So we'll have to jump in a new Teams meeting. So when we do share your screens, just be wary of what you're clicking on up at that top right hand corner. As a organizer and attendees, right now you probably don't see it, but if you share your screen, which we do encourage you to do, ask questions, interrupt me when you want to, just be careful of that button in there. So if I'm just hovering over there, if I hit it, that would end it for everybody. Questions that you have, you can put in the chat. Go ahead and raise your hand, come off mute, say, hey, Todd, you're going too fast, slow down. Let me see this, or I didn't quite explain that, or know what you're talking about. Let's try to get it to where we can. I see some names on from the previous course, so we'll kind of build these on. I did share a data set with Chris. Is just the color, the 2204955 is what we're going to be working in. I'm probably going to jump between FDOT's workspace in 2023 in the data sets that I have and some of the data sets that we deliver and the training guides that we deliver from on the Bentley side. And I did send those to Chris of some of the examples that I have. We'll go through and kind of build them from scratch as well. But if you want the files, to download. I don't know if Chris put them in the chat or Matt put them in the chat. They are in the chat, so you can download those. The PowerPoint that I'm going to run through, there's a PDF copy of those. There is your new 220. Download those and we can walk through it. So as I'm walking through the PowerPoint, feel free to download those, get those ready, and we can kind of jump into some of those files. There'll be some, not a big deal if you don't. We can share screens and kind of work back and forth. And then there also is the overlay stripping and widening zip. That is our online training that Bentley delivers. So all the tools that will go are native to Bentley. They might not be native to the FDOT workflow, but these tools are available in your workspace. Well, goal here for me is to just get a better understanding of those overlay and milling or overbuild components, of how we set them up and what we can do with them. And if there's a different ways that we need to explain it, let me know on that. But feel free to interrupt me if I'm going too fast. Tell me to slow down. Ask questions too. We do have a follow-up too. If you have a particular question on a project that you're working on, you can ask it here next. Is it Wednesday or Thursday, Brian, that we have a follow-up? I think it's Thursday morning, same time from 9 to 11 as a project specific questions, but bring those up here too. We'll kind of get through those. We're just going to run it show you the tools on this course or this time that we're doing right now.
Sorry, Todd, I was double muted. You are correct. It is Thursday, 9 to 11, and we will make sure that everybody on the call gets pushed off and copied in on that as well.
Okay. And we are recording these. So if somebody does miss this meeting, we will have those. I think the CAD office team there will post these videos, so we are recording it. So, but please keep this interactive. If you guys have questions, let's talk through it. I learn a lot of these from you guys, as hopefully you do from me. And in a lot of these things, these trainings, and I can't see your faces, so I don't know if you're getting confused or not. And for me, it's helping me just not feel like I'm talking to a computer screen the entire time. So if we can, let's keep it interactive. I might call on you from time to time just to see if you guys are paying attention or ask questions. So, but this is a fun, training fun zone. It's a safe zone. So ask the questions that you have. If I can't answer it, I'll write it down and I'll get back to the CAD team, or I'll follow up in the follow-up meeting that we have in there. So without that or further ado, careful not to hit any of the buttons. So we're going to look at the overlay and stripping and widening components. So we're really going to focus on the overlay and the stripping, because we know the widening part of it. We just need those different components of our surface. But when you think about overlay and stripping, think about your pavement design and what we want to do with that, because really that's what it's going to come down to in those components. Right, so we might have a triple R job. We're going to mill down 3 and we're going to put back 3. Or we might need some different adjustments that we need to do on that. So we're going to look at those 2 overlay and stripping components and how we set those up. And then we'll run through a couple of different examples. And like I said, I'll probably bounce back and forth between the PowerPoint here and ORD live demos. So I do have a couple files open in the FDOT workspace, but we'll get into those. So our agenda, we're going to introduction to the overlay and stripping components. We'll take a look at the overlay, stripping, and widening template components. We'll build those out. And then after we get a good understanding, or to be dangerous enough with the overlay and stripping or milling and overbuild, those terms are all interchangeable. We'll take a look at another tool of the vertical alignment optimizations and the milling, so we can adjust based on that criteria that we have with some of the different tools. You may not use them in there in the workflow. You might just design. It's all about that, the vertical design that we're going to build on there and building those components. And then we'll also take a look at some of your templates already built up for with the RRR US 98. So that data set we're going to take a look at. So we're going to introduce how these are set up and how those templates can be used. And if something doesn't make sense, let me know. I'll see if I can explain it a different way. The way I get confused myself and how these are set up, so we can kind of walk through that and if something is not correct in there. So there's only about 28 slides, so it shouldn't take too long. Right, so the introduction, right, to our RRR projects. There's tool use sets. Again, we're doing the overlay and the stripping or milling and overbuild components, and then we can use those to make our vertical adjustments. And then we can do our components will provide those quantities for us, and they're going to be independent of each other but required for the engineering solution. So we can kind of see some of those alternatives and build those out to see how we can save the state money or save money on the project and really optimize that project and the cost criteria. So we'll look at some of the reportings that we have on there. And then we can look at the vertical adjustments used to meet that design and cross the materials that we have. Right, so many construction projects today are rehab projects requiring overlay, stripping, and widening. And we have different tools that we're providing to the ability to better streamline that process and help easily difference. Let's look at the different scenarios to minimize those costs. And this is just another, so the overlay and stripping components, we can provide quantities for those. I did look at the FDOT's workspace, so you do have your item types attached to those components, and we can minimize that. So we'll take a look at those as well. I was really just kind of focusing on this first one on the components and getting a good understanding of those components themselves. But they provide quantities we can use for the road rehab, vegetative stripping, excavation quantities, and then the vertical adjustment tools that we have here. We can look at the top of the template or existing ground to minimize or optimize the overlay and the stripping or the milling and overbuild components that we have in there. Right, so overlay components or the overbuild. I think there is an overbuild. So overlay, overbuild are the same thing. We're going to build back up to our component layer, so our top surface on there. And if we look at our milling component, so usually what we'll do is we'll put our overlay or that milling component. Let's see if I can get a pointer on there. So a laser pointer. So we're going to do our pavement design, and this is our existing ground. So we're going to, at the bottom of our pavement design, we're going to put a milling component, and that's going to give us an overlay component from the existing ground back up that we need to build or overbuild. So overlay or overbuild, we're going to build that back up. If we're below that existing ground, that's going to be our milling component that we're going to build out those. So there's different criterias for the overlay components. For the follow surface, we have a top option and a bottom option. And I'm going to go ahead and open up our create template. And I'll bring this open. So this is going to work with our milling only. So this is a nice diagram, but let's see what that is looking at in this. So here's a milling only component, and that is just it's 3 points. So center line, and then our mill out to the right and mill out to the left. And the points themselves, that's just going to mimic a slope of 2%. So we put this at the bottom of our pavement design. And we're just going to mimic. So this is just going to say we're going to create this milling component back to a 2% slope. that we have in there. So if I double click on the component, we're going to see our component properties here. Let's see if I can get this out of the way. I can't. So our top option and bottom options, how we want this to behave is for our top option, we can follow the surface, we can follow our component, or follow the height. So we have different options of setting this up for that milling component, and then we can test to see what that's going to do. So the top option on our milling component is, oh, I need to go to a overlay component. Sorry about that. Do the same thing. So on the overlay component, because this is going to follow our component, in the bottom option, we want it to follow the surface. So what this is going to do, this is overbuild or overlay. So I noticed in FDOT's workspace, they have overlay, but they also have an overbuild component in there, and that's based off the feature definition. So on this overlay or overbuild component, we're going to follow the component that we see here. So this I have just at a 0%, so it's going to overbuild or overlay everything up below that up to this line. So think of this as our bottom of our pavement design that we need to build back up to. So we're going to follow this component, but then the bottom option of that is going to set to follow the surface and follow along that. And then we can also give a component depth for the top option or bottom option, or a surface depth. So if we want it to go down a certain 3 inches or 4 inches, we can build that back up in there. Right. So this is just on our points, our milling points here. We have just our controls, and we'll run through kind of how to set this up. Is this is going 10 feet at a 0%, so I could put 2% here. That would mimic our pavement design to that bottom. And our different points here, I'm going to do the same thing over on this side. And I'll do this as -2%. And I'll apply that. So, right, this is just our test. To see what that's actually doing, I'm going to click on the test. And I'll bring our little test button over here of the volume option. So on this component, I followed the component. And then the bottom option was following the surface. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to bring this over. And then I'm going to adjust my window here. Right, so our milling component, so think of this as the component at the bottom of our pavement design that we're going to build up to from that existing ground. So if we draw on our existing ground, it's not going to do anything above because we have an overlay. But if we get below our component, we're going to have to do an overlay or an overbuild to get to the bottom of that. So we have the pavement design on the bottom of this. But if we have our existing ground, which is the white line here, it's following that surface, but it's also following the component underneath. So if we had pavement design that we needed overlaid up to that new pavement design or that bottom, and we could put different percents in here. We do a 3% grade. We'll notice that it's only doing part of that. So this is just a quick overlay or overbuild component. So it's going to build back up from the existing ground to the bottom of that component that we put in there. The milling component is going to go from the surface up to that. So we're going to look at that milling component first. So this is just our overlay component and the different options that we have. So I'm going to save that. So on that milling component, or overlay component, I'm sorry, we have different options to follow surface, follow component, follow height. In the bottom, we can follow surface, follow component. We can follow the lowest or follow the highest. We have different diagrams within this PowerPoint and that PDF as well of the PowerPoint there. We can also specify a depth component depth or surface depth that we saw in there. Those options define the minimum depths of the overlay or stripping component will extend below the component or the surface. So for example, if our project required a minimum of 4 inches of existing material to be removed before the overlay, we can set that in that component depth of that overlay. So it always will go down 4 inches, and we can build that back up to the overlay in there. So in the illustration that we're seeing here on the slide, the overlay material, right? The overlay is stopping at the existing ground, but we have a minimum depth of 4 inches that we're going to do, a surface depth of 4 inches. So the resulting would see we're going to build that back up with the milling. So we're going to mill down from the existing 4 inches, and then we're going to build back up with our overlay component. And we can control that by the component depth or surface depths. Now, then we'll run through some of those different scenarios of that as well. And the component depth or surface depth is going to be back to how we have our components set up. So this bottom option right now is following the surface depth. So we're going to set a surface depth down here to have that control. If we switch this option to component and component, we would put a component depth here of say 0.333. And if I click apply, that's going to give us our milling of the component depth. And notice I don't have anything over here in the surface depth of that. But if I wanted to set that back to surface, apply, we'd have to set something up in the surface depth. So depending on what we want it to do and the different options, we have the different areas that we're going to look. So maybe we have a surface depth of 1 foot, or if we set a surface depth of 4 inches, we can apply that. When we apply this template, it's going to look at that surface and go down a minimum depth or that depth of 4 inches. We don't see it in the template, so we have the different options to set those as well. So on this side, we have our overlay component. We also have our stripping or the milling component. So we're milling down 4 inches. And to the bottom of the stripping follows the bottom of the component. So we're going to build that up. There's a top of our stripping follows that existing surface. So we're going to build down 4 inches. Then we'll build that back up. So we'll have the 4 inches plus our overlay that we're going to build back up in there. And then we have our pavement layer component. Right, and there's really no difference between our overlay component or a milling component. There's just one toggle that we really get into is going to tell the difference between our overlay build or a milling component. So if I click on the component itself, this is an overlay or an overbuild. The only difference is the stripping component. So when we do a milling or a stripping component, in order for us to see it in a report, we're going to toggle this stripping component on. So this is our overlay. If I look at my milling component, I'm going to double click on the component there. That's really the only difference that these is behaving, or the difference between these two components that we build out is this stripping component here. If we don't have that checked on, when we try to run a report, we're not going to see that report on, and I've done that myself. It is in the trainings. I forgot to toggle this on, or I missed a step in the training. So that's really the only difference between our overlay components or overbuild components or our stripping or our milling components, is we want this toggle to be turned on when we do our milling or our stripping components that we have. Right? And we'll run through the different scenarios. We'll start out simple with our overlay, and we'll do a simple milling. We'll apply those to a template or a corridor. We'll see what that's doing to the existing ground. So I'll do it in the FDOT workspace. I'll also go back into the other workspace there, or the Bentley delivered workspace that we're going to take a look at. Right, so our stripping component is our purple. We have an overlay component, which is the blue, and we also have our payment design, which is the gray. So I could give us a good example of what we're going to build out. And we'll look at that more in the next couple hours or next couple times that we run through the exercises. So once we have our milling, we can do our component quantities on that corridor to give us our milling and overlay and the payment. And then we can run through the cost quantity to see how much this is going to cost for us. So we might have a different vertical profile associated to that corridor. We can look to see how we can optimize and build out that be more cost effective in our project. If we need to raise it up just a little bit to give us more, have it alternative profiles, we can set those and look at those cost estimates. And then the unit cost here, we can give a quick test or unit cost and provide that to our engineer and look at those different scenarios that we may have. So our corridor component quantities tool provides volume totals of the closed shape components and the area totals of the open components. So all materials have a user definable unit cost field with non-zero. Our running cost is tabulated. We can look at that report. We can save that out as well. So we'll take a look at those component quantities as well. So we can user define unit costs. The tool it's not accurate for the end area volume. So if we're trying to get that, we'd have to run a different report to get those. All right, and then milling cost. So just a note of how the cost of milling was derived. So milling is often quoted by area milled rather than the volume milled. So a given quote per square yard or square foot, we can convert to an approximate cost per unit of volume. If we can assume an average depth, if we review the milling on the original surface, most of the milling areas in cross sections are triangular wedges. The average depth of those wedges will be 1/2 maximum milling, and given a maximum milling depth of 0.2 gives us an average depth or an average milling depth of 0.1, converting a quote of $2.50 per square yard. That would result in a unit volume cost of $25 per square yard. So we can build those out or kind of build those in there, give that quick cost estimates that you have. We can optimize the cost because really that's all it's about is getting that best design, looking through the different tools. All right, so often those milling costs are estimated based on our punnier area. So if we change the profiles, that's going to give us a change in the required or change in that cost. All right, so changing the profile will affect the amount of overlay, leveling, or milling required on a project, which in turn affects that kind of affect the total cost. Often milling costs are estimated based on the planar area to be milled. Quarter quantity component quantities tool provides milling quantities by volume, but not by area. So we'll look at those as well. So looking at exercise, we'll kind of run through some of that as well as we have time to look at some of these different reports and building that examples that we'll kind of look at. We might have a multi-layer overlay that will build out. So In one of the exercises, we're going to create and utilize a template with multiple overlay layers within a single project. So multiple overlay layers are useful when different materials are required for our structural integrity and to be more cost effective. This money can be saved on deep overlays by setting a maximum depth of a premium overlay layer and filling any additional layer with maybe a cheaper binder. So that's what we have in this example here is we have our pavement design up above, and then this is our milling component that we're going to strip down to. It's going to go to the bottom, and then we're going to build back with a economic overlay. And then we have our premium layer that's going to build in. So we can build that into our template, and we'll see how that works. So we'll build that simple example and kind of build those out. So we're going to start simple, and then we'll get more showing some different tools or techniques to build a more multiple layer overlay template. And then once we have our template built here, we'll go ahead and add our widening section. So maybe we have a widening layer, add in that secondary layer so we can get more complicated on our projects of if we have widening to one side, we can build those out as well. So we'll go through and add in our different layers and the different exercises that we'll have. And we'll also take a look at some of that FDOT has in their examples that we have. Kind of look at those. And if you guys have examples of projects that you want to ask here or ask at our next meeting, feel free to do that as well. So, all right, so our interior of our roadway, that's going to be our milling components. We talked about those. We have our pavement layer. We have our premium overlay, we're economical overlay, and we're milling down to those to meet for that. But then also we have our widening pavement layers. So we have 3 courses that we in the base, intermediate, and our structural course that we built into that. So we have a combination of an overlay and widening template that we take a look at. Right. So the next tools, that's really on the overlay, right? And getting in those. So the next tools that we're going to talk about or take a look at would be the vertical adjustments to the milling. So vertical adjustments tool, they help us optimize milling and overlay automatically. The different examples that they have here is it's a full width milling, or maybe we have a limited amount of milling that we want to do. That's going to help us create a best fit or a backbone on those vertical adjustments. So we can also use the vertical adjustments tool to assist in creating new vertical alignments to form milling that will result in a full width uniform surface. So we can build those out. So we can use that to help us define a new vertical profile that we have. So there's just different modes that we'll take a look at in the tool. And we'll look at that later on. If we don't get it to here, we can do at the follow-up as well. We can look at those. But that'll give you the different ways we can maximize or use the vertical adjustments tools to optimize that milling and overlay automatically. They have different examples that we'll walk through on those as well. That's what the next couple of slides are, is just different examples and the different milling modes. So if we use our minimum milling mode, that's going to be our example up here. We have a 0 milling, and it's going to be, we'd still mill down to that certain depth. So the top of the template completely below or just touching that existing. So using the minimum milling mode, the elevation of the PGL is calculated to be adjusted the top of the template until it is completely below and just touching the existing surface, or 0. So our template that we have here, if we have a 0 milling, we're going to set it to the top of our template, and it's going to be just till it hits this existing ground. That's going to be our milling. That's going to go down to that 0 milling on there. At these other instances, it's still going to mill down to the bottom of that. That would eliminate some of the milling. The maximum milling mode, we'd have that disabled. Here's another, so 0 milling with backbone with that thickness adjusted. So maybe we have a 3-inch adjustment or limit the thickness. We move those up, and then that's going to go to the bottom, or that 0 miss to the backbone there. That's going to go for example. So we're going to mill down to our 0 milling off of that. So we'll look at some of those ways to adjust those as well. So when we use the maximum milling checkbox is disabled, the milling can be any depth. When this option is enabled, the PGL is adjusted upward. So here we're going to enable that. So it's disabled. We'll put it anywhere. So our maximum milling is the example down here, our milling. It's going to adjust to the bottom of the template. We put that in there. Here's another example of just a 0 overlay. So overlay modes that we may have are different criteria. So you're using the minimum overlay mode, the elevation of the PGL is calculated by adjusting the top of the template until it is completely above and just touches the existing surface. So if our template point is here, and then our 0 overlay, so we have our 2% that we're going to take that, or 1% or 3% that we're going to build back to, is it's going to move the minimum overlay mode up above until the 0 touches the existing ground. Right? And it's going to be to give us that option. Right? So we have a backbone thickness adjustment to 0 overlay on the bottom of the template at that critical point. So the elevation of that PGL, or the template, is adjusted upward by the backbone thickness of the template and effectively calculates the 0 overlay elevation on the bottom of our template. So it's going to get that template over here. Right, so it's going to adjust it up if we use these different overlay modes down to 0 until the bottom of the template hits that existing ground. So that's 0 overlay with a backbone thickness adjustment that we can set. So maybe we want that to be 3 inches above, then it's going to take and hit that overlay. So the result is an overlay of exactly 0 at critical points along that backbone along the corridor. When it's necessary to ensure a minimum depth of overlay material, the minimum overlay thickness value is set. So it will be set in the tool, and bring this over here if I jump in. So on the corridors tab of the ribbon, and under the edit group or miscellaneous groups, this is the tool that we're talking about, overlay vertical adjustments. So if we click on that, so we're going to set these parameters in here in the vertical name, the minimum overlay, so different modes that we're talking about. So we have our minimum overlay, minimum milling, we can set the backbone thickness. And there's, in the second zip file for overlay and milling, there's a couple of different exercises that we can walk through if we have time to do that. Right, and this is just a different example. So when it's necessary to ensure the minimum depth of overlay material, the minimum overlay thickness value is set. So we have our minimum thickness, and that's going to ensure a minimum depth of overlay material. So the PGL is adjusted upward by the minimum overlay thickness. So we have minimum overlay thickness that is going to move up from this point if we have a minimum overlay that we're going to give of, say, 3 inches above that point. And so in the following illustration, the minimum overlay thickness that we're looking at here is defined by the distance between these two red arrows. Notice how the template has been shifted upward to assure that we have that minimum thickness. Right? If we use the maximum milling thickness value to achieve minimum overlay thickness without moving PGL up, that's our other option that we have. Right? So that's going to give us, we still have our thickness, but then there's our milling that we're going to go down, and it's going to maximize or minimum overlay thickness in there. So it's going to hit, you may have a little bit of overbuild in that one. Right? So a minimum depth over the material can also be achieved without adjusting the PGL upward as much by milling into the existing pavement. So when we use the maximum milling checkbox is enabled, the PGL is adjusted downward such that the maximum depth of milling is equal to the maximum milling thickness. Thickness value. So the template milling component must have a depth to force a milling to occur when the bottom of the pavement layer is above the existing surface. So in this one, it's forcing it down below, so we have to have a little bit of the material that we put in there. Right. And the next couple of slides here is just adjusting that to see those in the cross-section view. So we'll come back to these, but let's take a look at some of our milling components and build those out. But any questions so far from anybody or explain something different? So let me go ahead and share my other screen. Let's take a look at our milling components here. So in this example that we have here is we're in our Wakulla, the standard training guide that we have in there. So we're going to locate our corridor. So, and if you guys have this data set that you downloaded, feel free to follow along. There's a couple different files in here. If not, you can just create one. We can walk through and apply that corridor. So really all we need on in this file is going to be our existing ground and our existing alignments. But all that should be in the new 220.495 data set that Chris is in the chat if you download those. So within that file or that data set, I just created a model overlay 01.dgn. For example, or we can create another file and kind of walk through that. So let's just go ahead and do that. I guess, does everybody have the data set downloaded and ready to move on? And get a thumbs up or a yes if you guys come off mute. Get a thumbs up. So it looks like everybody has the data set downloaded and installed. So within that data set, I'm just going to come back and go close or a browse. So there should be an modlrd overlay .00 or 01 file that we can open up. And that's the file man. I have a different example in there. So from there, I'm going to go to the corridors tab and our create group. And we'll come in and go to our templates. We're going to go to our create template dialog. Right. And at the very root, so you should have in our new ITL file of the same name as our work set or our project, there should be a milling only, an overlay overbuild only, and then we have a triple R98 new, and then a simple payment. Right. So if These are examples that I have built up already. But let's just walk through and building these templates just from scratch. So I'm going to go to the very root of our project. I'm going to right click, I'm going to create new, I'm going to create a new template. And we'll give this a name of, this will be our demo. And this will be overlay. We'll do this as our overlay only. A lot of times what I'll do too is I'll create separate templates for my overlay or the overbuild. Those two are the same. And then the milling components, I'll build them by themselves as well. And then I'll drag and drop and build those to a main component in there. All right, so we're going to create a demo overlay only. And then we're going to go up to our tool settings. So we'll go to tools, I'm going to look at the options. And I'm going to go to my preferences and I'm going to load the FDOT options. And then I'll close. So that's going to give us our prefix left and right. And then our step options, we're going to set that to 0.1 and 0.1. And that'll just help us create our template that we're going to build from Fly. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on my dynamic settings. And I'm going to make sure I have apply fixes. And then we can set our point names for our points. So I'm going to scroll in from our point list. And I did have this spelled out. So this is going to be we're going to look for an overlay only. So we're going to do we'll do a pavement overlay out for our point name. So we want to click on the point name of pavement overlay underscore OOT. That's going to set our feature definition based on that point name. And then we're going to use the prefixes of our HS. So that's going to be horizontal and a slope. That's going to give us a distance from our origin. We're going to set this to 10, 2. So we're going to be 10 feet away from our origin at a 2% slope. And we're going to put in, so we'll come back to this later. And then I'm going to do a right click. We're going to add new component. And we're going to go to our overlay and stripping component that we have here. So we'll go ahead and click on those. And then we can set our name. This is just going to be our overlay. And we'll do dash overbuild. Let's just keep that overlay because we may have a different overlay than overbuild that we have in there. So we have our overlay component, and here's where we're going to set up our different components. Right, so our top option, we're going to follow surface, but the bottom option, we're going to have that follow component. Now, let me see in our guide. Have that set up correct. Right, and I have that switched, and that's where a lot of times after we build this, we can test it. This is just going to give us our source features. So the top option is we want that to follow our component. And our bottom option, we want that to set or follow the surface. Right, because this is overlay, so we're going to build up to our pavement design from these components. So we want the top option to follow the component. The bottom option is going to follow the surface because we're building up to our new pavement design with overlay or overbuild. And then we're going to have an active surface. We don't have a depth. We'll come back and build that. So we're just going to build a simple component there. So after we have this set up, the name's going to be overlay. The top option, we're going to follow component. The bottom option, we're going to follow the surface. And then I'm going to come back over to my dynamic settings. And I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to put that first component in there, our first point. Right? Then I'm going to come over to my dynamic settings, and we want to find our CL. Can't remember if we have a CL point name. Like it. We'll just keep it the point name for there, or if there is a null point. I forget in the point names on there. We want to use, so we'll just keep it the payment the overlay or olay out for right now. We'll come back and change that, or we could change this in the point names. So let's just rename that to, I'm gonna hit my caps lock. We'll rename that to CL. And then our settings, or the precision inputs over here, we're going to switch this to our X and Y. So we're going to set that to X and Y, and that's going to equal our 0, 0. So that's going to put this point at 0, 0 within our grid. So I'm going to hit OK on there. All right, so there we have our center point. And then we're going to go back to our HS. We're going to come back to our pavement layout. So we'll find that point name again. And we'll do this will be -12, 2, or -10, 2. Right, and then I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to draw it on the other side. So then I'm going to right click and finish. And there is our component that we have drawn in there. So if I hit fit view, right, so there we have our -2%. We can double click and check our components there. Right, and I did that kind of backwards. I'll just use this as a teaching moment. So on the center line, I'm going to right click on our CL. I'm going to delete both those constraints. So I'm going to create 3 different points, and I'm going to delete those constraints from all of them. So I'm going to delete those. So we're going to place it by this point, but then we're going to have our left pavement overlay out controlled by that point, and then our right overlay component controlled by that point as well. So I'm going to right click and add constraint. We're going to add a horizontal constraint. I'm going to put that from CL for 10 feet. And that'll become yellow, so that's only a partial defined component. I'm going to right click again and add constraint. I'm going to add a slope constraint from this point. And we're going to do this at -2%. I'm going to click OK, and that's going to move it down. Right. We're going to do the same thing over on this side, but over here I'm going to double click on the point itself. And we can bring that over, and this is another way to control that template. So we want horizontal and a slope. And then we can pick our points or pick it from the list that we have. So we're going to put those from CL and CL. And that'll give us a -10 because it's to the right and a 2%. Then we can click apply, and that will apply those. Right. So there's just our demo for the overlay only. So overlay is going to go from our existing ground up from the bottom of this component. And it's over here. Everybody good? That component. So let's test this component to see what it's actually doing. So we're going to click the test, and we can bring this over to here. And then I'm just going to do my shift key, and then my mouse will help me zoom in or out, and I can adjust that. So we're going to draw in our existing or active template, the existing ground. So think of this as the template component that we're going to build up to. So we're going to draw a active terrain to test this at a 0%. So the existing ground is below, we need to build up to the bottom of that pavement design. So if we go above the existing ground, we don't have to do any overlay or any overbuild. But if we get below that design, we're going to have to start overlaying or overbuilding from the existing ground up to the bottom or the component top. Right? And if we get below it, we're having it follow the surface, which is our white line. It's also following our component for the top option. So the top option is going to follow the component that we have built, and the bottom option is following the surface. If, say, we put in we'll mimic just a 3% slope for our existing surface, and then we can draw that. So we can test that out to see that's doing. So anywhere that this is going to get above the existing ground, we need to create an overlay or an overbuild on that component. Right? But if we get above that component, it's not going to draw. But if we get below it, we'd have to overlay to meet that pavement design from that existing ground. Right? So that's the testing on there. We just reset and then close. So that's just our simple milling component that we did on the demo. So let's apply that to a corridor and see what it does. So we'll apply that in our corridor. And there's already a corridor assigned to the model overlay. We just have different templates that I've built, examples down here. So this demo overlay is the same as this overlay and overbuild template that we built down here. We just did this one on the fly. So I'm going to go ahead and save this and close out. And if you guys are in that model overlay 01, there is a template that we're looking here. We'll just look at this and kind of see. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the template that we just made to our corridor. So I'm going to pick on my corridor handle here, and I set that from 2450 to, it's out to say 40, 43. We could shrink that down if we needed to, but we're going to apply this template that we just built to this corridor and see what it's going to do in our cross-section view. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and select on my template. I'm going to go to the properties, and there's our milling only. So that's the last template that we have. We're going to switch that to our demo overlay only. Go ahead, click apply. Right, so there is our component that we see for our overlay. So it's going to the existing ground and then building up to that new pavement. So if we look at our cross sections, and I'm at 24 plus 60, we can change the exaggeration on our cross section. So we can set that to, say, 5. And then walk through, or we might need to set that to 10. Let's actually set that to 5 to see. Right, so in this example of where we are, to get to our new pavement design from our existing ground, this overlay is building up to the bottom of that. So if we're trying to match this slope, we'd have this much overlay that we would have to build into that in this particular design. And if we kind of walk our way through that, we can look at the different areas that would build in there. So we're holding the 2% slope off of that. If we change and raise that elevation just a little bit in there as well. All right, so we're seeing that if we're going to mill that back in, we need to have this much overlay to correct that slope. So we have that cross slope correction or the different multiple overlays in there. All right, does that make sense to everybody? Any questions on that, the milling component? Or the overlay component. All right. And we will take a break probably halfway through. I think we're, 9 to 12? We got 3 hours. I don't know if it'll take the full 3 hours, but we'll go a little bit longer and we'll do a quick break. And we'll come back and look at some of these other components on there. All right, so that's our milling component. Now we're going to go back to our template. And we could go and build a milling component over, but we have already created our demo overlay. So we could create that from scratch, but if I have the milling, the only difference is that secondary component. So I'm going to go ahead and copy our demo for the overlay only, and then I'm going to paste, and that's going to be so I'm going to right click and copy this, and then I'm going to right click and paste my demo overlay, and then I'm going to rename that to our demo, and this will be our milling. And this will be our milling only. So again, I like to build separate components or templates in here, and then I think of them as Legos that I can build the templates together and test them out. So I can get through and test what I want this to do within there. Right? And the only thing different between our overlay component and our milling component, so I'm going to make the demo milling different in there, is we're going to have two different templates that we pick. So we're going to have to change the name of this. So this is going to be our milling. We're going to set this to our cross sections. We're going to do our pavement milling. So this is a milling or a stripping component. So we're going to toggle this on. That's really the difference, and then how we want that to control, how we want to control that. All right, so from our milling surface, we want that to follow the surface, but the bottom option, we're going to follow our component. I've got a 50-50 chance that I'm setting this up correctly this way. So let me go and see in our next component. So since it's a milling component, I want it to follow the surface. And then the bottom option, I want it to follow the component. So if I had a certain depth that I wanted the bottom option to set, or a minimum, I would come in here and set this minimum depth of, say, 4 inches or 3 inches. So if I have that minimum depth that I have in there. So again, if we think about that pavement design, what are we doing in that pavement design of mill and fill, right? So if we're milling down 3 inches, are we putting back 3 inches? So we need to think about that pavement design and see what it's going to do. The only other difference between milling and overlay is toggling on this stripping component. So there we've created our milling. We did change the feature definition to milling. So we're going to click apply and then close, and we'll test our simple milling component. Right, so I'm just going to do our zoom to get that in so we can draw at 0%. Right, so if our existing ground is below the bottom of our component, we're going to draw down. So we're going to mill down to that component. If everything was above the existing, we'd have to mill down and then build back up with our overlay. If we get below our template or the pavement design, so think of this component that we put in as the bottom of our pavement design. If we get below that, we'd have to just grind out or mill past that. If we test this in the 3% as well, right? So if we get above, if everything was below, we'd have to mill that out to get to our new pavement. But if we get below this pavement, since we're following the component, we're only milling out a certain amount that we have. Right, so we have those in there and close. So there we've built our 2 millings and our overlay. Right, so now that we have these 2 separate ones, we can apply it to this simple template or the simple pavement. So here we have our pavement, that's simple. We're going to make a copy of this and we can see what it's going to look like if we just have milling or if we just have our overlay. And then we'll do a combination of those 2 different ones, because we might have that solution within there. Right, and I'm using the guide from our Bentley delivered as just some points to run through. So that is a good guide to run through and look at the training. So really what I want is to get you guys to understand those milling components in there. But as a reference to have to go back to, you do have the overlay and stripping and widening training guide within those different zip files and those files that we have in there. All right, so there we've built our 2 components for our demo milling and then in the demo overlay. So I'm going to go ahead and save and then I'll close. Here we just applied our simple milling. I'm going to go back to our template. And here I'm going to come back and let's do our milling only. So if we do our milling, so there from our point here, we're set down to 2% and 2%. So there it's coming from the existing ground. We'd have to mill down to get that 2% slope that we're trying to create. And then that we would have to fill that back in, or that would be the bottom to the design. So we're going to mill and then put back our pavement design, and it's following that 2% that we have here. Right, so those are our 2 different milling components. So that's really just but building those two different ones that we have in there. Any questions on the milling or the overlay component so far? Everybody good? Yeah,
Hey
question,
Todd,
Art.
I think there is something in the chat.
Okay.
It says, can you go back to the point or the component properties?
Yeah. And Art, if you want to come off mute, feel free to.
Yeah, I just
Component
wanted to go
quantities on
over.
one.
Yeah, Todd, I just wanted
Yeah.
to go over that component properties for the milling component again, just to see where which surfaces you're targeting, because I think I got confused a little bit there.
Okay. So the milling, the demo milling only. So the top option is I'm following the surface, and then the bottom option I'm following the component.
Okay. And that stripping toggle there, is that for the stripping component for the milling? Is that so that it quantifies it correctly later on?
It is for that, and it's also so we see it in the report, the milling report
Gotcha.
that we can take a
Okay.
look at. Because if we didn't have that on there, this component, it's going to see it as just an overlay. This really toggles on, okay, this milling or this is going to see in that report is by this toggle. Is the only way
Gotcha.
you'll see it in that report.
All right, thank you.
Sure. So maybe on this one, milling, and we'll just do stripping. Though they're kind of one and the same, or if stripping makes more sense. Apply on that one. Close. All right, so we got any other questions or so far? Okay, well, let's do this. Let's go and let's take a quick break, and we can refresh coffee and take a bio break. So we'll go from, it's 10:15, 10:14. We'll take a break till 10:30, and then we'll come back and we'll continue on. Get up and stretch your legs, and we'll continue back at 10:30. I'll probably give a 2-minute warning in the chat, and then we'll get going probably at 10:30 or a little bit after 10:30. So let's go ahead and take a quick break and come back before close to 10:30. All right. Well, thanks everybody. We'll continue on after that. All right, if you guys do have questions, put them in the chat too. But sometimes I don't see the chat, so you guys can come off mute too if you want to and ask questions as well. So don't feel like you're interrupting me. I like the interaction. I like the questions too. So
Hey, Todd.
Yeah.
I have a question. I posted it in the chat. We have this one project where we've got like longitudinal milling where you start off at 4.5 inches, and then we're ending up at 3.5 inch mill longitudinally. Can you explain how you would set that up? I put a little Snagit photo in the chat there to explain it better, but how would you approach that technique as far as
that might be something I would have to research on a little bit more, Art.
Okay.
On that one, I can take the screenshot. I can see if I can look at. So I might pin that, and then at the follow-up call, I'll see if I can get an answer on that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. You're going for 50 feet milling, mill 3.5, then you're going to mill 4 inches. My first thought is maybe 2 different templates on the same corridor to get that, or maybe it's an average of those 2. So yeah, let me ask on that a couple different colleagues back, and I'll do a follow-up on our Thursday call. And that's kind of a perfect segue into those questions. If you guys do have questions like this is kind of what this is for. It's not your normal training or formal training. It's questions like this that we can bring for and do the follow-up. If we need another follow-up too, we can get that on the call. So there's 2 items that we kind of have, or the blueprints that we're running on these. So that is a great question, Art. I'll look into that and follow up on next week with you. All right. Well, I do have time. I think everybody is back. So let's go ahead and let's just take a look at our templates again. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and look at this simple payment. So all I did on here is just to set that up, just simple payment to our left edge of payment at a 10-foot or 12-foot. So we're just doing a saw cut line to kind of mimic that. And then that's what our templates are going to be based off of. So we're going to use this as our new payment design. And then we're going to put our milling component and the overlay components at the bottom of this. And we'll apply those just to kind of see how everything's tying together on that. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that simple payment. And then I'll go ahead and paste up here. And if I can find it, so there's my simple payment. I'm going to right click and rename that. And this will be our simple payment. We'll just do with overlay. We'll do that overlay build on that one. So then I'm going to double click on that and make that my active template. And then we'll go to our demo overlay. I'm going to do a single click on that, as you guys probably know. And then I can drag and drop that into this component here. So I'm going to take our demo overlay. I'm going to make sure my simple payment overlay is my active template. And then I'm just going to drag and drop that. And I'm going to merge these points together. So there I have my payment that we're going to draw, and then we're going to overlay up to the bottom of that component. If we test, and if we draw, so if we get below that payment design, all right, we can put that on the existing ground. So we're going to build up to that. All right, so if we come in and save that, we'll apply this template to see what it's doing. So there we just had our milling set to that. We're going to come out and switch out our templates. And this will be our simple template overlay. And there we're underneath our ground. We may have to look to see if we get above that template. And this is where, we might want to adjust or set that different template on there and kind of bring that out. Because I don't think we're going to get that in to see that in this particular situation. But the other data set that we have, we're on my other screen. So I'm going to go ahead and show in just the Bentley workspace that same template that we have. So if I go here in corridors, it'll have the same templates because I'm running through that training guide. I'm not going through it step by step, but I'm just looking at those different exercises that we have in there. And I'm doing the same thing just in our data workspace. So I have my simple payment overlay. And I did the same thing here as I just built my milling, my overlay, and then there's a multiple overlay that will go through. So that economical. So I have overlay only. There's my simple payment. Right, we're putting that corridor on there. So we're going to mill or the overlay is going to be built up. So this is the same template that we just built. I just want to show you in this other workspace. So I'm going to apply this simple template to my corridor that I have here. And I'll go ahead and pick on this one. And that's going to change. And then I'm going to go and open my corridor or cross sections and take a look at that. So there, right, if we were coming back up to match this pavement design, so there's our new pavement, there's our existing ground, there's our overlay component. So we'd have to overlay up to the bottom of that surface. We'd also have some milling in there. But as we walk through our cross sections, right, we're going to see that milling component. There we have a hole that we need to fill in. That's going to fill that in. So that would all be our milling component on there. So same exercises, same tools, same concepts, just in the Bentley delivered workspace. So the practice that we're kind of looking at. So same process, and it's all going to be based off of that template that we have assigned. So if I come in here,
Hey,
I think
Todd.
it's, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good.
But, we typically mill at a constant depth. We don't really mill at those variable. That's why I was asking that question in the previous before the break, was how you're setting up your milling template
Yeah.
is
So
a little bit different than we normally would do it.
okay. And I mean, there's different ways too. So how do you guys normally set it up, or how do you set if we go back to?
I mean, we usually have a constant mill depth, and it follows the existing ground. And if you're milling like 3 inches, then it would be like, I think I typically set it up to where the top option is following the surface, and then the bottom option is following the surface, but then using a particular depth, whatever the mill depth is. And that's how I normally set it up. But
okay. Yeah, so on that one, let's go back. So let's do this, and let's just look at those. That pop up. Yeah, so let's go back to the create template there and go on this milling. So if we look at this component, so you're saying the top option is follow surface?
yeah, and then the bottom option is the way I've been setting it up is follow surface, and then I set a surface depth for the bottom option to make it a constant mill depth. But I didn't know if that was, it worked for us, but I didn't know if there was another way to do it or.
No, it's because it's either like components. So say I did follow the component, I could do the component. Then if I have a certain milling depth here of, let's just say 3 inches or 0.25, and apply that. So that's going to come in and, it's going to mill down to that 3 inches. So that would give that common depth. And that's what kind of looking at your example is like, I don't know, we could probably put a label. I'd have to look at this component depth.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could use like a parametric constraint.
I think you can, that we could kind of put that in like the label of, maybe this is the
mill depth or something.
Mill depth average or mill depth, underscore, we can put that in there.
Yeah.
So underscore, right? But this is going to set it down to, even if you follow a component, it's going to go down the 3 inches. If we can take a look at that. So
yeah,
if this is how you normally set it up, it's going to go 3 inches. Then we have that. Let's apply, close. We'll do our milling only. So I'm going to close this and save. And let's come back and do that milling. That's going to come in, and I don't think there is a way to get that, but that would mill down the 3 inches. And that's following the component. Right. If we go back to this, and I can go to the edit, but I'm going to come back in here and look at that component. So that's following the component is going to be 3 inches. We do follow surface, we would have to put the surface depth down here. And we want that to be 3 inches below. And then, so if this bottom option is set to follow surface, it's going to read this. It's going to ignore this component depth option, even though there's a value in there. So I'm going to take this out. I'm just going to zero that out. But based on the option that we have, it's either going to look at this, the surface depth here, since we have surface, and then we'll test this label that we have here. We won't get that preview, but then it's going to mill down the 3 inches below. So if I close this and save, if we synchronize, right, that surface depth, so it's following the surface going down 3 inches.
Yeah, that's typically what we do.
Okay, so yeah, this, and let's see now if we can do a parametric constraint on this. Oops, let me bring that over. And we'll select our corridor. There's our mill depth. Say 4.5. I don't know if this will be. And then what was the other one? 3.5 divided by 12.
Yeah.
And let's say, just to see that, we want from 25 plus 0, 0 to 25 plus 50. So we're going to go from there to there, apply that, and then let's go and open up our cross section. If we set that to 25 plus 0, 0. All right, and then we walk, so we're going to go 10 feet. I don't know if we can do, I tried this earlier with a vertical temporary dimensions, and I could not get that to read. Hopefully that, so if we come from our existing surface, it looks like that's about 4.5. Let me hit my running coordinates. Draw a line in there. So that's 38.6725. That's 38.9975. So that looks about right, and that's halfway through. So let's go up to 2550. That's 38.87. 38.58. So it seems to be doing that by just putting the label in there. So you could just control by a parametric label
that
with
worked.
that one.
Yeah.
So
Awesome. Thank you.
yeah, no problem. Thanks for the question too. So okay, so let's see what else there is. Let's go ahead and move temporary dimensions. All right. Any other questions or examples that you guys have? You can run through. And that is kind of the beauty of this too, is don't feel like you're interrupting me. We can do a sidetrack if I can't get it. We do have the follow-up calls that we can look at as well. All right. So it's just getting and really getting a good grasp on these components and what we want to do, making the components do what we want it to do by applying different constraints and looking at information in there. Right. So if we go back to our templates, and I got to look to see where we were left off. If we do that template, this is just doing our overlay. Right. So we can apply it to the bottom of that. So maybe we want to look at this milling component now. And we want to come here. So this, we have the overlay on it. That's to the bottom. But then if we want to copy this, so I'm going to copy this template. And I'm going to paste, up in here. And we'll come back up to this. And this will be our simple pavement, just overlay. I'm going to rename that. That'll be overlay and widening or milling. So we're going to add milling to this template that we have in there. And then I'll save that. And then I'm going to double click on that simple pavement and overlay milling. All right, so we have our overlay that we put in. And then we can come in and grab our milling component. And we can put that at the bottom of this one too. So now if we apply that, we'll have our milling that's going to go down to that depth if we test. Right, so we have our milling that's going to go in there. Right, I didn't really show this, or this is a good test too. It's going to mill down the 3 inches or the 4 inches, whatever we define in there. This was 3 inches from that existing ground, and then it's going to build back up the overlay to that. And if we check in to draw, say, a 3% and draw that in, so we're milling down 3 inches. We're going to come back up, and then we have overbuild, but then we also have milling that it's going to put into. So if we get that in there, that's going to follow the surface and build that back in. So different ways you can get to do what you want it to do or need it to do in there. Right. We reset and close that, and we'll save and put that in. Then we can update. Oops. Hopefully it won't do that. And I'm going to update my template. And we're going to do our simple, so that has everything in there. Right. Now I don't. So that would be the one bad thing here, is it's going to follow surface and not follow the component. If we do have another component on there building that template. But again, you're thinking about your payment design of what you need to do. It's like, what are we taking out? What are we putting back in there? Right. So here it's milling down the 3 inches, and this is below. So we might have that put in there. So that might be something for the bottom to follow that, the bottom component in there as well. If we look through this, there we're following the surface. And then we're going to mill in, and that's just 2%, but maybe we're coming back in there if that's what, if we had this to follow that surface as well, we could set those in there. But just setting those variables and knowing what the different variations that we have or it can be set in these components themselves. We can change those and then the milling depth in there. All right. And then if we go to our corridors tab, where is, or if we select on the corridor itself, we can go to reports, the little pay-per-click, and there we can look at our corridor component quantities on that. This is where we can put in those reports. So we have component quantities. You can get it from the corridor handles themselves, or if you go to the home tab, and there we can put the unit cost in to see how much this is going to cost for our milling and our different volumes. So there we just add milling, or if we have overlay, we can put that information in. We can report on that information as well and kind of look at those different things. Right. We also have under our reports, our corridor reports, our milling report. In order for the milling component to show up, that's where we toggle on that stripping component, that little checkbox. So if I look at my milling report now and select my corridor, there we'll have our station and the offset, and we can have that milling report in there. So this milling report that we have here is what's the main difference between an overlay or overbuild component and the stripping or the milling component. Is just that toggle box. It's going to make it look at or be seen by this report that we take a look at. Right. Of that, we have the millings. Any other questions that we have? What else do we want to do? So I did the cost, template. Any other specific project questions that you have, or typical ways that you do the building, or anything else we want to explore? Yeah, Michael, you got a question?
Hi, Todd. Yes, I have a question about the milling component. Should we pick on the pairing on the milling once you go to the milling and open it up? Should we pick a pairing component and pick the paving to follow it? Yeah.
And so if we do that one,
Yes.
road pavement, that is more for if you're trying to create a display rule. We don't, and end conditions. So if we want to turn something off based off or group components together and create a display rule, this pavement, that's always going to draw, and then therefore this milling component's always going to draw. We don't necessarily have to set it here.
Okay.
So if we try that, click apply, that's only if we would have something that's not going to, if we don't want it to draw and turn those items off. So if we look at, that's more or less like a switch or a trigger.
Okay.
So if I look at this RRR98 new, there's a switch or a trigger up here. So this is a switch, and there's a display rule on this component. I think on these components. It's not in there. Let's see. But if this criteria meets, it's going to turn these off. So let me come over. Let's save that. Let me come here. So I'll double check. I don't think you would have to put it on a parent component. I don't think it hurts anything, but for me, it's just the display rules. So let me go back in to this one. So say on this widening, we'll just come in here and we'll add a new component. We're going to do a null point, and I'm going to place that up here. It's the same thing that FDOT has with the triggers or switch. So it's just a switch up here. So say we want to turn off this widening at an intersection, or we don't have the intersection, we're going to take it back to this edge of pavement, or from outside this edge, we have curb and gutter built into that. Save this, and let me go into a different template library. If we go training and practice, don't have it set up in there. Let's do templates. Let's see if there's anything in here that I can do. I'll go into this one because it has it set up. So, project templates, components. Let's go in here. So on this particular situation, we might have an intersection to the left. So this just has a null point up above. So this point is set 2 feet above. We're using a parametric label on this, so intersection to the left. Or we can find a horizontal feature constraint of a match line. So it's going to take and search from this point out, or CL, out 100 feet to the left. If it finds this horizontal features constraint, or if we define a parametric label to say, let's go out 1 foot, it's going to turn some of these off. So on these components out here, if I test this, I'm going to right click and test this point control horizontally. So if I go to the right, it's fine. But if I move to the left, it's going to turn some of these components off. So everything outside of this edge of pavement line, right? So that's a trigger or a switch to turn those off. So on this curb component, there's built in a display rule in there. So intersection to the left, and if we look at that intersection to the left point, so intersection to the left is going to read this rule. Intersection to the left, it's horizontal, so it's going to find the difference between CL and this intersection to the left. So we're just putting it 2 feet above at 0 from the CL. So if it moves outside of that, it finds a horizontal feature constraint or locates that parametric constraint. It's going to turn everything off because we're basically turning off these components off there. So that switch is to the left. On the components themselves, is we've applied the display rule to the curb component. This component is going to be a parent of all these other components. So when this turns off, it's going to turn all these off. So if I would look at this component here, the parent component on that in the group is this curb. So it's going to keep these all together to turn off or on. So if I don't want it to display in a certain area, or I can use that parent component relationship to turn everything off in one area by applying this trigger, this switch to that particular area. And if I look at my active template on this template here, if I switch the views, I can look at my points, components. There's my display rules. And there's the intersection to the left, intersection to the right. If I look at my components and find my curb, I can look to see what other components have a display rule to that. So underneath that TC curb and gutter type 1 left, I've added the aggregate A shoulder, the grass berm, the curb type right. These are all under that display rule. Right. So if I look here, there's my sidewalk. So this has a parent component of that component of there, or I could put it all to this component to turn all these off at one time, and using a display rule in that parent component relationship. So does that make sense? Great question, by the way, too.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. All right, so let's get back to other components. All right. So we've done the milling, we've done the simple milling component. I do want to say, so we went through our example if we had a multiple layer. Do you guys ever have a multiple layer overlay or stripping component? So your component depth of 3 inches, and maybe you have a premium overlay that's maybe 2 inches, and then say a secondary overlay, economical overlay that you want to fill in the gap. One overlay is more expensive than the other. We can run through an example of setting that up. And we'll run through that next. Here we got 12. So let's go ahead and do that one. So, and this is exercise 4, just running through that. So in this exercise, we're going to create and utilize a template with multiple overlay layers within a single project. And from here, come in and look at a template that I already have built. So I double click on, you guys don't have this one, but this is our pavement layer. This is what we're going to build. So we're going to walk through the process of setting this up. All right, so we have our pavement. That's just a normal component. We have our premium overlay. We have our milling that we have in there. So we have a milling and overlay in our road pavement. So when we layer components on top of each other and we do a double click to get to that component, we can select the different components that we want. So we're going to look at our overlay component on there. All right, and this is where we're setting our component options. This is our premium overlay that we have set up. So we set this originally to the bottom of this pavement layer. The top option, we're going to have that follow component, but the bottom option, we're going to have it find the highest point. And then we want that component depth from the top option to read or be 4 inches. So we always want it to mill down at least 4 inches. So that's going to keep that common thickness. So it's kind of what we were talking about in the other example that Art gave us. This time we're just having the top component follow the component depth to follow the top, this component there. It's always going to be 4 inches down. That's going to be our original thickness. We can move that to a 2-inch thickness as well. This one's set up a little bit differently of how it's set up because we have our milling component here. We also have another overlay an economical overlay down at the bottom of this. So we have a different rules in there. So this might be an option too of how this is set up. But we're going to set that to follow the component and then follow surface on this overlay that we have here. Maybe it's a binder or the buildup. It's ruled off at this point. So let's walk through just how to set that up so you have it. You might not use it, but again, we're just going to get dangerous enough to build the templates that we need, or maybe it is a situation that we're going to need on there. So in these different examples. All right, so let's go ahead and I'm going to close this and I'll minimize that. Oops, we'll go back to our FDOT and our templates. So I'm going to go back to the create template. And we already have our components set up. So we're going to come up and right click and we'll do new. And we're going to do new template. And this will be our, let's just do multi-layer template. And we're going to make that one active. Right. And I'm going to put this at our simple pavement. So I'm going to double click on the multi-layer. I'm going to do a single click on the simple pavement. I'm going to drag and drop that in. And I'm just going to place it somewhere and then fit view. And then I'm going to use my dynamic settings here. And I'm going to set my precision inputs to X and Y. And I'm going to key in 0, 0. I'm going to right click and I want to move this point. And then I'm going to come back to my precision inputs and I'm going to put that'll allow me to move that component precisely to my X and Y of 0, 0. And then I'm going to hit view on that. All right, so that's going to put our template here. And this is going to be our pavement. So we may have another friction course or different courses that we're going to be built up or built on top of that. So we're going to build that back. And this just has that 3-inch. So that's just 3 inches from the top. So that's just giving us something to visualize on that. All right, so now we're going to set up a premium overlay component. And the example that we have, we're going to set that to the component depth. We're going to set it to 4 inches. Or we can set it to, maybe it's a 2-inch premium. That's good. And then we can set another one to 2 inches or create an economical that we fill in that area on there. All right, so we're going to pick our overlay components. So we already have that built, so we're going to go to our demo for overlay. And I'm just going to drag and drop this in, and then we'll make adjustments to it. All right, we could come in here and right click and add new components and do overlay and stripping, but like I said, when we started, I like to build these out and have those as different components, as basically Lego pieces that I can come back and build this template together since we already have it built out. So we're going to pick the demo overlay only. Right. And I'm going to do a single click. I'm going to put that and merge it to this bottom CL point. I'm going to grab from our preview. I'm going to drag and drop. And I'm going to click on these 2 points and make sure that they're matching or it becomes white. That's going to merge these 2 points as I bring this template in. And then I'm going to double click on the component. And I'm going to go to overlay. I'm going to rename this to our premium overlay. I'm going to set our feature definition to excess. And on this one, so we have overlay, overbuild. Let's just pick the payment overbuild. So this is just another option that we can set, but this will give us a way to visualize, you know, the overbuild. Maybe our overbuild is our premium overlay that we're going to use. We're going to set that feature definition on to have a premium overbuild or premium overlay. Right? So now that we have that, our top option, we're going to follow the component. The bottom option, we're going to set this to follow highest. And then our component depth, since we're following the component, we're going to set that to 4 inches. So I'm going to do 4 divided by 12. And that'll put that in there. If we needed to, we could do our label here if we want to control that thickness.
So Todd,
Right,
the top option, when you set it to follow component, it's just going to follow wherever you drag and merge that onto. It's just going to follow whatever component it's sitting on top of.
correct. It's going to follow this component here.
And then when you're saying bottom option follow highest, you're instructing it to say it's going to follow the higher of the two, either the component or 3 inch or however many inches below the depth that you're setting there.
I believe so. Let me look. Yeah, I believe so. See there. Have to grab. So that's page 34. So if we're setting that up in the training guide, so our bottom component, right, we have 4 options. So if we're following the highest, the bottom of the component will follow the higher of the surface line or the overlay stripping component line, string at a specified depth. So it's going to search for what's higher between the surface or the component itself that it's attached to.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. Great question. And that is the nice thing about the training guides too, is they're good resources to have like the different summaries or some of the explanations that you have, and you guys have this as a resource or the PDF to go through some of those. Your other option there to find some of that is you do have your search ribbon or the help documentation. You can search in there as well to get some of those definitions within there. All right, so we're going to follow component, and then the bottom option is going to find the highest. So it's going to find the highest component from the surface or the component that it's attached to. And it's always going to find that component depth of, say, 4 inches, or we could have 2 inches. So whatever we want that premium component, maybe it's 1.5 inches. And again, we want to think about that pavement design of what we're bringing. So maybe we are going to mill back or overlay back with premium of 1.5 inches or 2 inches. And then our whatever is more expensive or less expensive, so we can minimize that or have two different types of components that we have in there. And lost my training guide. Let's put that back. All right, so we're going to follow this and we'll just see what it's doing. So top option is follow component. The bottom option is following the highest. Our active surface component depth is set to 4. And then I'm going to click apply and we'll close that. So now if we come in test, right? So under our payment, we're always going to have this premium if we test that and put, say, 3% in there to test what this is actually doing. So it's going to find the highest component or follow that surface and to draw that out, or it'll be 3. So we might have another economical overlay that we have to fill that gap in. That's what we're going to build into. So we're building multiple layers in this template that we're building on there. So we can recognize that overlay component follows higher the component, right? The bottom or the surface, and it's going to put that 3 inches there. Right, so we can reset and close that. Right, so now we're going to add in another overlay component, but we're going to just place it at the close to this bottom of here. So we want it to look at this bottom of this part of our premium overlay. So we're just going to place that in here and build another layer into this template. And then we're going to rule it to these points up to there. So we'll go back to our demo milling overlay. And on this one, I'm just going to drag and drop it, but I'm not going to come up and snap to this. I'm going to snap, just place it just below, like on this part. And this might be where we have a different feature definition. So we're just going to put it in here. I'm going to double click on this, and I'm going to come in and select a different feature definition, just so we can visualize it a little bit differently, so it has seeing it different in our 3D model. So on this one, I'm going to go and I'm going to pick on this, maybe this is our payment overlay. Because we had the overbuild, that's going to be our premium. Maybe this payment overlay is our economical. So I'm going to rename the name of this component as well as our economic or economy overlay. Right. On this one, we're going to top option, follow component, bottom option, we're going to follow surface. And we do have the variants that we can set within those as well. Right. We've looked at those. It's all how we want it to behave or do what we want it to do. So in this one is going to be our economic overlay, and we set our feature definition to payment overlay. Our top option is going to be follow component. Our bottom option is follow surface. And I'm going to click apply on those and close. And now we want to come in and we're going to rule this point to these points up here, and then these points to that as well. So we're going to keep the slope, but we're going to change our vertical or horizontal on these points to read from there. That and put it at 4 inches below. So I'm going to right click on this point. And I'm going to add constraint vertical. I'm going to pick on the CL bottom. And I'm going to set this offset to, in this case, it's going to be 4 inches. So 0.3333. And then click OK. And that's going to move that up to that point. It's just partially defined in there. Right? So I'm going to come into this point and I'm going to double click it to just show another way. We're going to change our horizontal to vertical. And we're going to rule that off of vertically off of this point. Slope's still going to stay the same. So we want that to be our R underscore EOP underscore bottom. And that's going to put it 4 inches away. Apply. And we'll do the same thing on this side. I'm going to double click on this. We're going to change the horizontal to vertical. And we could also pick on the targets and locate that. And that'll put it 4 inches below. And then we can close. Right. And this one, so now we have our premium, which is the 4 inches. We also have another overlay that as our economical, if it's below this, we can fill that in the gap. So if we test this now, there's our payment design. Here's our premium. We're going to set this to 3% and draw our active terrain. And now if we draw that, so if we came to this situation here, is we have our premium, we can minimize how much fill or overlay that we have. We can have multiple layer overlays to build those in that situation or the situation. And here is we have our premium level. That's always going to be 4 inches or 2 inches, but then we can fill in with that economical or the overlay. So we have our overbuild and the overlay that we have in there. So we can run through and build that in there. So the trick on that was to give that depth. And then our second economical overlay, we're going to rule it off of these points. So it'll draw that into that situation as well. So if we save this, we can close. And now if we come in and switch to that multi-layer, in this situation, we don't have it, so we'd want to come in and there's corridor. So I'm going to look at so there we only have one profile, but on that, and I was using the active profile. So this is where we could come in and use the milling tools or the vertical adjustment tools or design another profile that we have on this to build those out or maybe raise it up so we can minimize that information. This is just putting in existing ground. So maybe we have it back up here or building that in that we need to build that out. So we can put here, and then if I reproduce this one, so I'm not seeing one of my components there. So now we need to troubleshoot. That template. So we're going from here down. Put that up. Oh, so we're missing one layer on that. And I need to put so in this, we have our overlays, but now I need to put our milling component at the bottom of this pavement design. So we have our premium overlays, we have our economical overlay. So now I need to come in and do our milling. And I'm going to drag and drop that. We're going to put that to the CL bottom. I'll put that milling component in here. And now if we test, I did miss that one. So we have our payment design, we have our premium overlay, we have our economical overlay, we also have our milling. So if we draw at 3% and draw that in, we're going to mill down our 3 inches or we can set that back to where it's going to hit. But then we have the different situations where we have our milling, that's going to go down to 3. We have our economical overlay, and then we also have our premium overlay. So we put that together on there. So this is going to 3 inches because we had our milling component to follow surface. That's our stripping component. And we saw that we can change the mill depth. We're going to set that to 3 inches. So maybe we wanted this to be 4 inches as well. We can put that in there and then save on this and close. So now if we update our template, there we have our milling that is going down and following that surface. All right, so not ideal. We'd probably have to come in and tweak this up, but we would get that information in there. And then if we go to our home tab, we can look at our milling report. We could also look under the model analysis and reporting tools. We can do our element component quantities and look at that report on there. There we have our pavement asphalt, and then there's our milling, and we can look for our overbuild. So I have one mesh component that's not set correctly, but then we have our components for our milling and our top mesh. And then we can give those a unit cost in there as well to see what our asphalt's going to cost, our overlay or milling components in there. So this is based off of what we're seeing or have set up in our templates that we have. Okay, so if I go back to that template, so I'm going to just double click on my asphalt. So there's our pavement asphalt. That's correct. Double click on our premium overlay. That should be coming in as our overbuild feature definition. I should see that. And then I'm going to go to my milling component, and that's pavement milling. Let's say this is that should be milling. That's milling. What is it's overbuild? Let's say this is our friction course. That would be a friction course in there. Just seeing if it'll change that display. And then this economical overlay, set that to our structural course. Then I'm going to save that, and we're going to update our corridor and update that template. So now if we come in and do our reports, mesh. So I'll have to look at that, but I think what I would be saying is the different courses or the mesh components that we have set on that one already. All right, and that's going to build that the template that we have in there. But that would be a way to kind of build out a multiple layer a template. And if I go to my corridor report, oops, look at my milling, I can select that corridor, and that'll give me the milling report that I can look at and review as well on that. All right. So any other questions on milling or anything that didn't make sense on the overlay or milling components? I know it's a lot of information thrown at you in a short amount of time. I think, are we done at, was this a 3-hour session, Brian, or was this that we had on
I
this
think
one?
I think we had set this one up for 4, but we had
Okay.
discussed it. We had discussed if the material only went to 3, that was fine.
Okay.
It's your call, my friend.
Nope. Well, it's the user's call. So, is there anything else that you want to see, or do you do vertical adjustments in your design? That would be the last tool that we could show, or just to kind of run through some of that. Is there any other questions, comments, concerns on just the 3R, or anything from project specific that you guys want to ask?
Now's your chance, everybody. Yeah, if you want to run through the vertical adjustments, fill up the rest of that time. But yeah,
okay,
all good,
yeah,
my
I can
friend.
run through that. You guys have that training guide. I mean, I'm following it, but I'm not running through it. But questions that you guys have too, for if you don't think of something today, if you do in those follow-up sessions, if it is a project specific question, we can take a look at that as well. The only other thing that we would do on this, and then we can look at our vertical tools, is I'll go back to corridors and that template. So we've pretty much built, just this simple payment and the multi-layer payment, and looked at the milling components and the overlay component. So we come back to our overlay component, and we'll just double click on that. Right, we have our different options: top options, bottom options, and you do have a PDF of the PowerPoint that I ran through too. So it's really, the control is in the top option, bottom option, and doing what we want it to look at. You have different options. For the bottom, you have 4 options: follow surface component, lowest and highest. You also have your follow surface component and highest. We can add labels. The only difference between an overlay or overbuild component and a milling or a stripping component is toggling this stripping component on, right? They're pretty much the same. They're set up the same way and manipulated the same way. It's just, in order to see it in the report, that milling report, we need to toggle this part up on, is the only difference in those. Right? If we go back to our multi-layer template, say we have our widening saw cut line, 10 feet or 12 feet. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to build out the widening section on this. And we can just right click on those and add new components. This is just going to be a simple component. But if they are already built in your components that you have up here, if there's different widenings, so pavement left, it's already built together. I can just drag and drop into this like we have been doing. So there's a left and a right. So I can just drag and drop that in, place those 2 points on there, select my left. I can drag that one in, and there's my milling. I can finish out that by just doing the components. The other options that I would have is add new component. I could add a simple component, and I can define what that simple component is, or what I want it to be. So I can come out and do my cross sections. Maybe this is a shoulder that I have that I'm building out, shoulder pavement, shoulder overlay. If I'm building those, I can build that out. So you have the components and the feature definition set up. It's just the different options of getting those to do, or building those components for that design that you have in there. So I'm going to cancel out of that. So that's a couple different options. We still have that. And then if we apply this component, right, and if we update our template, there's our widening that we have in there, right? And the same tools, same things that we're doing, we can make those different adjustments in there. So we're looking at the different criteria that we may have within those, but we have that widening. Before we jump to those vertical tools, under the examples in training, for training, you have different template examples for pavement and milling and resurfacing inside the design 3D modeling course. Right, this is we have a different one for overbuild, the cross slope. But this one here, this triple R98, I just came down and copied it down here. So if we review this one really quickly, I'm going to double click on that. And this is where it would have the different situations on there. So what I noticed in this, there's not a right way or wrong way to build the templates. But if we test this, we're going to get some different results in there. And that's because on this point, notice our components, or this component here, for our left pavement overlay is looking at this section. This is just a normal component, but it's not filled in this situation. That's because one of the points is a project to surface. So it's going to run down and project to surface, so it's not going to fill that in on there. So that's based off of this point, which is the left pavement overlay out. Right, that point is a projected surface. So it's going to draw from this point out of that's going to be our template and draw the pavement PM. But then it's going to come in and search for the existing ground or active terrain, project a surface on that. So that one, that's just going to do the slope is going to be whatever that slope is as it ties in. So if I test this, and we test that, so we know if we draw our existing ground at 0, active terrain model, right, there we have some of our milling and correction. So it's coming in and finding that surface. So this point is a projected surface. So it's following on the edge of pavement and drawing down in there. That might be what we want. That's an option that we can have. But that slope, and there's our overbuild or our overlay or milling. So those different milling components are set up that way. So if we would apply this, it's going to apply that little area that we have in there. If we put a percent there, say 3%, and redraw that, it's still going to do what needs to be done. The other option on that is what we did down here on this new one is I will notice that there's a difference in those components. So on this one, I just made it a regular component. And I just made it a slope of 1% or 2%. I took that constraint from project to surface back to a regular constraint. So if you switch those to a project to surface on that component, it's a regular component, but it's going to show it as just a hollow on there. So that's just 1% or 10. You know, the 10, we have that label that we can control it, or we can look at this milling line, or say we're going back to 2%. Close. We can do that. Same thing was on this point. This point was a project to surface. So say we want that to be 2%, whatever that design is. That we can come in. There's also was another point that was a project to surface too on there. So we can apply that. That's a 0%. So those were all project to surface on some of those different points. But now if we test this one, since they're not project to surface, and we draw that in, right? So to get to that new template for milling at a 3%, we have our milling component, which is a cyan color, and then we have our overlay or overbuild. That's going to get us back up to that point. Or if we set it to 0 and test that out. Right, so there they had a depth of 4 inches, or we can look at that depth that they have. So I'm going to double click on my components. So there's our pavement, there's our milling, there's the overbuild. So we have our overbuild component. I'm going to look at the milling component. And there we're following surface. It's a stripping component. There's our pavement milling depth of 2 inches. So it's always going to give us 2 inches from our surface, but it's going to follow that lowest option for the bottom option. So it's going to look at the lowest of the surface or the lowest of the bottom option and always be the 2 inches from one of those. We can set that to the highest as well. It works the opposite way. All right, it's going to look at the surface or the component and be 2 inches from that. So that's defining what those are. So that'll help us kind of build in that cross slope correction that we would have in there. We have those two in there and save. So that's really the only difference between these two. So if I close and save that and reapply it, if we look at, say, this template, we can switch that out to this one. Okay, there's our overbuild, there's our template. So we can kind of build that out, and it's going to find those different components that we have in there. So maybe we need to do some adjustments within the different our geometry files or build out different alternative profiles. We have a couple different options that we can do. So I'm going to jump into our alignment file that we have here, and I'm going to go to our home tab, primary group, and attach tools. And we're going to jump into this LAGNRD02 file. So to make our vertical, since they're in that file, we don't have our control in the file. So if we need to add additional vertical, we need to do that profile, as you guys probably know. So we're going to browse to that ALGNRD, the O2. I'm going to open up that file, and I'll go through some different options that we have to create alternative profiles. Right, so I'm going to go and open up our 3 views now that I'm in my ALGN, and our main alignments are in here. I referenced in the train that's active that created the default 3D. So I'm going to go ahead and do our view controls, and we'll do 3 views. We're going to do our 3 views plan profile in 3D. So we're going to open that up, and then I'm going to go ahead and select our US 98 and open up this. All right, so here we have different views. I'm just going to clean this default 3D view up and turn off my all my levels except for that DTM EX. So I want to see the terrain in there. So the first option, or one option that we have to build an alternative profile on this, or a best fit profile, is we can go to the site tab, and under the site tab we can go to our grading tools and the profiles, and we can do a best fit profile tool from here that we can use to build that. This best fit profile tool under the site tab is going to work in the profile view elements itself. We can set those parameters up. So this is one option that we could build. These tools, I like them a little bit better than the corridor tabs tools for this, the overlay vertical adjustment tool. And the reason is that if you use this tool, it's going to run through and create the PIs. So it's going to create a chopped up profile, which we'd have to probably create a best fit profile off of anyway. So it'd be an extra step. But this is another option that we could use that will run through these tools as well. So the first one that we have, we're going to go to our site tab. We're going to do grading, and we'll go to profiles. We'll do our best fit profile. I'm going to go into my profile view, and we could set the parameters for our K values, tangents, and we'll just set our minimum. So our minimum Z, maybe that's 0. Our maximum Z, we want that to be 5, or set this to -1. And then we could set our K values for the maximum slope or the tangent lengths in there. So I forget what the K values are, tangent lengths. Is that 150 or whatever design criteria that we're building that? That's built into, so your K values. So maybe we're setting our tangent length to 200. And our K value, that 150 on the standard, but we can set those depending on the standard. And then this is going to create a best fit from our profile view. So when we can build that off our existing ground. Right, and there I have one in there, so we want to build this off our existing ground. It's going to work its way through the tool. And this will run through different iterations, creating a best fit alignment from that existing ground. Right, and there it created one. So I can, when I close this dialog, it's going to create that best fit alignment. There it is. The only bad thing about this is I can come in and edit that. It's not chopped up. It's a good profile in there. So that's one option. The only bad thing about this one or the tool is it doesn't set a feature definition on that element or on that profile. But I can just come back to my geometry tab here and set my feature definition and pick that alignment. And then I can give that a name. So feature type, I'll set that to alignments. Pick my alignment, maybe baseline. I have to do it twice. Pick that, and then we'll just say this is our demo. Right, so I'm going to pick our alignment, right click and set. So now we have another alignment on there that we can use as a demo. We can come in and change or tweak or make those edits. And that might be above or below. We come in and reset those. All right, so it's all about building those profiles into those, or building that alternate profile, knowing what we're going to do on that project. That's one way to do it. We also have on the geometry tab, under our vertical tools, we have our best fit profile too. So define profile by best fit. Right. We can make a complex element. We're going to set the feature definition. The alignments, our baseline. We can give this a name of, maybe this is our demo alternative 2 or alt 1. We could set up our upper envelope. So maybe we want this to be 0.5 inches above, or 6 inches above, 3 inches, whatever it is, above that existing. So it's going to search and build that above the envelope, above or below. So let's just say 1 foot. Lower envelope, set that to 0. We can set our minimum curve length, our desirable sags, and our crests, whatever those values are. All right, so maybe we set 150 and 150, and then the minimum curve length They want that to be 125, whatever that standard is or that design standard, we can put those values in there. Right, and then we're going to do a left click, locate our profile that we want to base it off of. There's our parameters. So there's our envelope that it's building in. And there we have another profile that we can use. And on this one, the only thing that we want to do is we want to convert to profile rule. And then we can come in and edit those. But that's going to create alternative profiles in case we need to raise that grade or adjust on those grades in there. All right, with just the regular tools. So we have our site tool and grading and profiles. We have our best fit profile. And then we also have our geometry and vertical or best fit profile. So there we have a couple of different profiles on there. From the training guide, the third option is when we looked at or first started is we might have minimum values that we want to make those adjustments. So to use our milling or overlay vertical adjustment tools is we'll be in our alignment file. The first thing that we need to do is reference our model, our corridor, where we're modeling that overlay back into that alignment file. Right? And then we can come in after we have that, because the first thing that this tool is going to ask us for is to set or pick a corridor. All right, so we're going to locate our corridor. That's going to be our reference. And then we can lock it to start, lock it in. We can do our different thicknesses. So the backbone thickness or the backbone parametric. Right, and that's coming back to if we have those different adjustments in there. So from our PowerPoint, we were talking about the 0 milling, those milling thickness. We can set those to these different parameters for what we want to do and make that those different adjustments. So those vertical adjustments that we're trying to make to give us alternative profiles and give us the maximum or optimize that milling are based off of running through those tools here, those minimum overlay tools and the thicknesses. So we're going to run through and create an alternative. I'm not going to run through all of them, but we'll create one or two, and then we'll see. We have a couple different profiles on there. All right, so we've attached our corridor we're going to run through. So maybe our backbone thickness, right, that we have here, we're going to set that to, let's just say 0.25 or 3 inches. All right, so that backbone thickness is the thickness from the profile grade line to the bottom of the template. So that's going to set it from the bottom of the template up to that profile grade line. And that's 3 inches, 5 inches, or whatever we're going to have in there. And we can set our different modes of that. So the mode then, we can set that to minimum overlay or minimum milling based off this criteria to build different profiles off of those. And then we can use that to make those adjustments to our different profiles. Right, so we're going to do minimum milling. 3 inches. All right, so this is going to be an overlay vertical adjustment, or maybe it's overlay vertical adjustment. Our name that we're going to put in here is minimum. I can't spell. Our minimum milling that we want to put in. Right, and then we're going to do a left template range point. Accept those parameters. We're going to do an alt or lock it to our start. Go to the end. Do our thickness. Parametric label, we're going to leave that as blank. Mode is going to be minimum milling. Use maximum milling, we're going to set that to no. And the left template that we want to come in and we're going to adjust that template, and that is our left template. There it was. So we need to select our left pavement overlay. Our right that we want to run it out to is going to be our right pavement overlay. Did I not put that in there? There's our right pavement overlay that we used. We're going to match our template range and examine all those cross sections, and we don't have a maximum. Right? We're just going to click through. It's going to build that template or that alternative profile in there. And then if we look at our profile lines, we have, right, we can just run through those and set those different parameters up. So we have our different alternative profiles that we can do and to give us or optimize the milling components that we have in there. The other option is to, on this one, is maybe we want to minimize the overlay that we have in there. All right, so everything's going to be the same. The backbone thickness, that would give us another minimum overlay component in there with the overlay on there at that 0 depth. So it's just different ways to create alternative profiles that we have. And then we can come back to our milling component and make those adjustments in there. So once we have those profiles in here, we can go back to our model overlay and we can set those different profiles on that. So we only have one active profile, but we have multiple profiles on our alignment that we have in here. And then I come in and open up. We're going to do 3 views, plan cross section in 3D. I'll locate my corridor, select my open. So there we have our whiting that we put. And if I come in and select on my corridor and go to corridors and use active profile, I'm going to set that to false. And then I can come in and look at my different alternatives. So there's my original one. Right, there's my minimum milling, and if I switch those, that'll update, and I can see, how that's going to affect my different profiles or the milling, and I can run the different reports on those by just coming in, selecting the different elements on there. So there's our one that we did a foot above. And then I can look at the reports. I can look at that corridor report. Where's that? Our element component quantities or component quantities, that milling report. Select my corridor, and that will give me a quick cost estimate of what it's going to cost to do our, on those 3 milling overbuild and overlay information on there. Right, so I can take a screen, I could save this out, I could look at this report as well. in the style sheet. I could save that. Maybe this is alternative 1 as I save this out. And the formatting, I can save those out. Unit cost of giving quick estimates on what it's going to cost to overlay or mill that particular project. And then look at the different alternative profiles that I can set that on. So maybe there we have our demo. So we can minimize that milling or those overlays that we have in there. All right, I think that's all I've got for you with overlay. Any questions on components or questions in general on milling and overlay? I know it's a lot of information thrown at you in a short amount of time. Okay. We think we do have an hour left, but if you guys don't have any questions, we do have the follow-up. If you think of something from between now and then, just let us know, or put those in the chat. Let your CAD team know if we'll be on for the 2 hours next week. So it's probably an open call, but I'll be on it to help out with questions if there's something I need to clarify from what we have. But if you have a project specific question, happy to help you out if I can. If not, again, I can look at it, get that information, research it, and get back to you that we have. But I think that is everything that I have for you guys today, unless there is questions. I'll open it one more time for you for the last hour, or just general questions as well. No?
Crickets.
Well, crickets. I should have called on some people. But no, thank you, Art, Michael, and everybody that did have questions. So, going forward with all these, this is just sharing the knowledge that I have to you guys, getting in there, asking those questions. Don't be afraid to ask them, to get in there, even if it's, if you have that question, other people have that question too on there. So it's just a different type of training for you guys.
Yeah, the other thing to kind of remember here is that even if for the follow-up call next week, ask somebody in your office that wasn't able to make the call. Maybe they have something too. So it's a great opportunity and a great resource having Todd online here. But thank you very much, Todd. That was a great job.
Thank you guys.
We appreciate it all. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. You guys,
Thank you,
thank
Todd.
everybody else.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, if there's no questions, we'll just close it right on out, my man. It looks like people are already dropping off. Yeah. I think they're running to lunch. They
probably are. So yeah, if you want to hit end, we can stay on. And
you told me not to hit the yellow button.
Well, if we are done, I'm going to hit the yellow button.
Hit the yellow button, my friend.
I'm just glad we
did that.
So
It's all good. Have a good one.
Yep. Thanks everyone.